right, go ahead, Lindsay.
Okay. Hi, good morning. I'm Lindsay Evans, and I'm here with April Martini and Ann Candido, founders of the Cincinnati-based marketing agency Forthright People, and also Forthright Women, which is a community that encompasses community supporting women and continued learning resources to support women, especially working moms. The Forthright Women cohort is a community where us women come together unapologetically with our ambitions and our aspirations to have an equally fulfilling life and career. And when tradition says that we must choose, we don't believe that. So this conversation is coming to fruition. The mission of Forthright Women in pursuit to live life as we desire and on our own terms. And that starts with us as individuals and being able to manage our personal brand. And this is a conversation that April and Anne are very familiar. They have it often. So I'm really excited to dive in with the two of them. And then we are also giving away some business tools related to the cohort, a personalized coaching session with April and Anne, as well as a coveted spot in our Stand in Your Power Executive Mom Leadership Program that we've launched registration, and the program will start on April 1st. So that's an 8-week facilitated program. Both are incredible resources, and we're excited to share those with you. So without further ado, April, Ann, would you like to take the floor?
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. We're very excited to be here and talking about one of our very favorite topics, which is personal brand. So April, you want to go to the next slide? All right, so what we're discussing today. So we're going to first start with what is a personal brand and why should I care? And what we truly believe is personal brand is at the root of being able to achieve our goals and dreams. And so it is a key to really be intentional in cultivating it. And we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about what are the 4 personal brand characteristics that hold back aspiring female leaders, not trying to stereotype, but through a lot of our coaching, there are certain themes that emerge that are or seem to be female centric. And so we just, as you guys know, we're forthright. We go right at it, and we're going to talk about those. And then we're going to give you some tools in order to help you really start the journey into your own personal brand immersion. And of course, you have us, you have the cohort, you have the Executive Mom program as well to really help you develop these further. So first, what is a personal brand and why should I care? So really fundamentally, each of us is our own brand, and the way we show up determines how society will interact and engage with us both personally and professionally. And this is a really powerful statement because a lot of times when people talk about personal brand, they talk about it in context of branding in general. And we're branders and we get that. But the really, oh, go back, April. But the problem with that is that we already exist. So when you try to think about us as brand, it doesn't seem right to be able to contextualize it in terms of something that you think you could create from scratch. Even though we feel like, we can reinvent ourselves, and we can reinvent, we can evolve, we can develop. We can't necessarily like start all over. There are things that are already in us that are really, really essential to who we are as a person that we can't change, frankly, but we can really think about how those things show up in a way that helps us to cultivate a personal brand, because ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to sell ourselves. And when we say that, sometimes we get like the cringy looks, and everybody's like, sell ourselves? That sounds like really, really, really something bad and not something I want to do. But just think about it in terms of your day-to-day. Like, how many times do you go into a meeting, or you go into a conversation with somebody, or even you're talking to your kids? In all those cases, you're trying to sell some sort of point of view, some sort of agenda. You're trying to influence in some way. And really what we're trying to do is get these people to see, hey, we have something of value to offer, and you really should be listening to what we have to say. So when we put this in context of selling, it kind of helps us get out of our heads a little bit and get into this third party approach of how do we maybe workshop ourselves a little bit in order to really foundationally understand who we are as people and what is it going to take in order to achieve our goals and dreams. And this really becomes a foundation too of self-promotion, which again, we tend to get like a icky look when we say self-promotion, because a lot of us, especially as women, can tend to find self-promotion a little debilitating. Like we don't want to, seem like we're being self-serving, or we feel like, we should share all the credit. And those things have their places, but really in this day and age, we need to promote ourselves because nobody's going to do it for us. And that doesn't matter if you're a woman, a man, no, it doesn't matter. But the whole idea of self-promotion is all about taking the foundation of what makes us special, what makes us unique, and really put that in a context of something that's going to be of value to other people. So what is a personal brand in a fundamental structure? This is something that we uniquely own, because a lot of times when people talk about personal brand, again, it feels like a punchline. It's like, oh yeah, like what I'm wearing is my personal brand. And that does have a role to play, but it isn't the only role. And it's not just your LinkedIn profile, and it's not just the way that you are going to show up in this certain context. Your personal brand is developed from the inside out. And that's what we really want to fundamentally get to, because again, we are our own unique brand. And so we need to make sure that we are really positioning that in a way that's going to be conducive to helping us achieve our goals and dreams. So when we start talking about personal brand, we actually start from the outside in, because that's a lot easier for people to really wrap their minds around. So first is your behaviors and actions. And this is really the way you engage with the world around you and reputation it creates. So this is how people see you. This is in the context of like your work environment, your personal life. This is what people would say, or how they define who you are. And this is the part that we can control. And so this is the part that we want you to become really super hyper aware of, because this is what dictates whether or not people are going to buy what you're selling. So for example, as you can see from my characteristic, I'm a very direct person. So how does that show up? It shows up in different ways in different contexts. So I am definitely going to always state my POV very firmly, but in some ways, if I'm in maybe a super sensitive crowd, that can be seen as very off-putting. And so then I have to learn how to modulate my tone so that my audience can better receive it, because it's my responsibility to make sure what I am trying to convey is well received. It's not the other person's responsibility to take it in a way that I think they should take it in order for my POV to be received. And that's a really big mindset shift. And that involves like taking the accountability back on us and really thinking about our audience and making sure that how we were coming off, how we were showing up, is in a way that can be internalized by them. Now, this can actually show up as being a good thing too. So if I'm in a board meeting and these people are looking for a strong, confident leader, and they want somebody who is going to state their point of view firmly, and they don't want somebody to mince words, this can actually be very helpful in a way that actually moves my personal brand towards my goals. But then you have to think about it all from a 360-degree standpoint. So your appearance also plays into this. And this is how you physically and verbally show up and the perceptions it can make. A lot of people will say this is your image. So if I'm thinking about my appearance, I'm thinking about my appearance in these situations. I might be thinking about the fact that, hey, if I'm going to be standing there with my arms crossed as I'm talking about my point of view, that's going to show up as super assertive. It's going to maybe show up as super edgy, maybe a little bit combative. And also in my tone, if I'm expressing my tone in a very direct way and I'm not mincing words, it's going to show up as very matter of fact. Is that going to be the tone? Is that going to be the look that's going to be received well by my audience? That is the process that I have to start becoming more aware of to see if indeed what I'm saying is going to be well received. Because remember, it's not just what we say, it's how we say it. But that's all rooted in a characteristic that is solely mine. And that is my feature. That is, and that is something that I need to own, and that I am a direct person. These characteristics can come from multiple different places. It's maybe how we're raised. It's maybe the culture we're in, maybe the religion that we have. It might be things that we've learned as we've matured and grown. These characteristics can come and can emerge from a lot of different places. But the key to your characteristics is that if they're not something you can change. If I'm extroverted naturally, I'm not going to all of a sudden be introverted. Or if I'm introverted naturally, I'm all of a sudden not going to become extroverted. I can work through my appearance and my behaviors and actions to train myself to be different in different situations, especially if I'm triggered by certain things. but I'm not going to change who I am. So I think that's really important to understand, because that is the crux of your personal brand, is to really start recognizing those things, not addressing them as strengths or weaknesses necessarily, but just the fact that this is who I am. It's made me who I am. This is my brand. And so therefore, learning how to express this in a way that is productive is going to move me towards my goals, or it could show up in ways that aren't productive that could move me away. So why should I care? So I've talked about this a little bit, but let me kind of just put some bows on these points that I made before. And that's, if you don't define your personal brand, others will define it for you. I think this has happened to all of us, where we have shown up in certain ways and we didn't intend for ourselves to show up in that way. Maybe we had a bad day, maybe somebody triggered us, maybe a situation triggered us, and somebody got a perception of us and we didn't intend for that to happen. Now, a lot of times they'll say, you know, you need to give yourself a little bit of grace, but if you don't have that filter by which to assess, hey, that's not really in line with my personal brand, a lot of times we'll just let those things slide. And what happens is those things start becoming consistent ways that people start talking about us. It's that word of mouth thing that kind of tends to happen, and their perceptions become their reality, right? And there's nothing we can do about that if we are not managing and proactively managing our personal brand. We want their perceptions and their reality be just something that we cultivate, not something that they define on their own based on maybe an interaction they had with us that didn't go quite as well as we were hoping it would. And the reason why this is so important is going back to one of the original statements I made, is that you depend on others to achieve your dreams and your goals. We are all humans. We are in a human relational world. Until the world is run by robots, as I always say, there's always going to be a human on the other side of the sale. So you have to express yourself humanly, and you have to receive that from other people as humans as well, and develop those relationships in order to be able to forward your goals and dreams. Now, a lot of times this seems very manipulative. It is anything but. It is being intentional. It's being aware. It's being mindful of the fact that, hey, I have a vision for myself. I have an agenda for myself. I have goals and dreams for myself. I'm going to need other people, regardless if I want them or not, in order to help me to reach those goals and dreams. I'm also, in turn, going to help others do the same, right? Because others need us to achieve their goals and dreams as well. So this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will, when we start to really channel these things for good. So another thing that we always like to really emphasize is the different elements where personal brand really comes to play, and how this can really impact us as human beings, because like I said, we're all humans. So one is your health. When we start acting out of consistency with our personal brand, especially our personal brand characteristics, it starts taking a toll on our health. It could be our mental health. It could be the fact that we don't feel valued. It could be the fact that maybe we get triggered and we start overeating. It can lead into physical health. It can make us feel depressed. All these things, when we don't act in concert with our personal brand, we tend to feel. It also can work on the positive side, that when we do work in contact with our personal brand, it starts to fuel us. It starts to motivate us. It starts to empower us, and it starts to make us feel differently. So that is a really important thing to keep in mind. It's also in the context of defining yourself and who we are as people, which gives us the confidence we need in order to pursue our goals and dreams. And then your family. I mean, how many times have we engaged with our family? That could be the hardest environment by which we have to really be relational with other human beings, from little ones to older ones, and sometimes older ones that act like little ones, right? So that becomes an environment that we can really put our personal brand to work and really become more aware of how we're showing up for others. And then obviously in the work, which we've talked about a lot, which, you know, as we talk about in the context of wanting to rise in our careers, in context of wanting to get promoted, in context of wanting to build our businesses, all of those things, our personal brand becomes the foundation by which we manifest those. And this is one of them, I think, the most important enlightening stats that I think is really eye-opening, but when you start to process it, it feels very real. So 90% of decisions are emotionally led, and your ability to connect on an emotional level will dictate your success or failure in business and in life. And it's a very profound statement, but if you can embrace it, you can see how this shows up in everything that we really do in life. I mean, from the products and services we choose on a like tangible brand level to the people that we choose to bring into our inner circles, right? I mean, how many times have we looked at somebody, we judge them in the first like 2 seconds, and then we've developed their brand for them in that way, right? That's an emotionally led decision. And that's why when we interview, for example, we don't just look at resume, we want to interview and we want to talk to people because that's what gets us to who they are as people. And that helps us to develop that emotional connection, whether good or not so good. So when we can really embrace this, we really think about the fact that we're leading from the heart center, and then our brains help to rationalize whether or not we're making a good decision or not. You start to realize that those emotional connections can be very powerful. So when should you be thinking about your personal brand? I mean, normally we say always. I mean, that always should be something that you're constantly processing through. Initially, it can be kind of taxing and a little bit cumbersome to continue to have that feedback loop with yourself. But after time, those neurons start connecting in different ways, and the behavior starts becoming a little bit more natural. And then you start to see that natural behavior starts to build organically, and you start to create new tapes about yourself, right? But there are specific moments in time where you should be like, okay, going into this situation or thinking about this situation, I really do need to think about my personal brand and what my personal brand means. And that's when you're maybe going through a career pivot. Okay, so this could be very, very important because you're going into a new context. You're going into a new group of people. Remember, what I said is that it's your responsibility to make sure the way that you show up is according to your personal brand. You are a new leader or manager or have a team or a new team. This is also really important because you not only have your personal brand that you're activating through, other people have a personal brand that they're activating through too. So knowing what their personal brand is, knowing what your personal brand is, helps you to find those intersections of how you're going to work as a team and how you're going to build culture. Your career or your growth has stalled. I will say, and I think April would agree, that especially through a lot of our coaching clients, 90% of the time, this is because there's some sort of something going on in the personal brand, and it's usually an appearance thing, right? Because these are the sensitive topics that nobody wants to talk about nowadays, and nobody's going to tell you that it's the appearance thing, but it's usually something that's breaking down here. And so it's really good to really go back and think about how people are reacting to you in certain situations to see if you notice any trends. Or you're facing challenges in reaching your desired goals. I mean, this happens a lot. It's like we sit and we're successful to a point, and then we're no longer successful. And we're wondering what happened. Usually it means we need to go back and take a look at our personal brand and see what's working for us and what's not working for us. So these are just some examples to kind of think about and in moments to go back to really hone into your personal brand, but you really need to be thinking about your personal brand on a regular basis. Now I'm going to turn it over to April to take you through some more specifics.
Yes. So if you remember from the agenda in the beginning, the second kind of half of this, if you will, is to talk about some of those characteristics. So as a reminder, Anne had used direct as one of hers. But we're going to talk about the 4 personal brand characteristics that we feel like hold back aspiring female leaders. And we want to be really careful here to say, this is not gender stereotyping. This is based on our actual experience and the female leaders that we coach, and also just the experience Anne and I have had over the collective 40 plus years of being women in business. And of course, we want to put a plug here to the point of tools that we have a podcast episode, actually more than one, on personal brand, but one directly about this, which can give you even more context than what we're talking about today. So first, I'm just going to give you the top line of the 4 personal brand characteristics, and then we have a slide for each one where I will talk more in depth. But just so you have the suite of what we're talking about today, and hopefully you'll see as we go different opportunities to leverage or not these depending on the situations that you're in. So the first one is caretaker, and that's really what it sounds like. As women, we tend to over-index in the desire to care for others, and sometimes it's at the sacrifice of ourselves. Empathy goes along with that. We tend to over-index in being empathetic, so internalizing other people's emotions and sometimes to the point of our detriment, but really being able to feel what others feel. Fairness advocate, so believing that all things in life should be fair and what that looks like for you. And so that one comes into play in the way in which we interact and then perhaps go to advocate for others. So that's the other part of that. And then in being humble. So as women, we don't always like to sing our own praises. We don't necessarily like to talk about ourselves because we believe that being humble is one of the things that we really hang our hat on. So, and again, just a reminder that characteristics are neither good nor bad. So as I talk through each one of these, there will be some commentary about how they can show up. What we really want to get at is how to effectively manage them for yourself, not necessarily talking about them as good or bad. Because as Anne said in the beginning, they are just part of who you are and you can't change it. So you have to learn how to leverage them. So those are the 4. All right, so every slide looks like this. So we have the same setup, just so you know. So I'll talk through what each one is, how it can show up to a little bit of our detriment, perhaps, and then kind of some thoughts on counter triggers. So ways that you can proactively manage or build tools or change behaviors or acknowledge things that are happening in the moment and pivot and shift so that you're showing up the way you want to. So caretaker, as I set up in the beginning, this is just an overall general female expectation to nurture and care for all people. And like I said, when I set this one up, this one sometimes shows up as putting everybody else before ourselves. And so the big thing Anne and I like to talk about here is we always use the oxygen mask reference, right? The idea is to care for yourself first and then be better at taking care of others, but we don't always lean into that or do that. And so some of the ways this can show up is avoiding conflict and in so doing, or needing to feel like you are going to make everybody else happy. Respectful conflict is actually really, really good. And I know it's something that's hard, really not just for women. I think as human beings and, just in general, a lot of times we don't want to address uncomfortable situations. And if you layer on the idea that you're a caretaker, you're like, I don't want to bring that up. And also I don't want to make someone feel bad. And my goal is to make other people happy. And if I bring this thing up, that's not going to work that way. So that's one of the ways it shows up. It also shows up as an inability to say no. And I mentioned already with the oxygen mask analogy, putting other people ahead of yourself. And in our coaching situations and speaking engagements, a lot of times what comes up for people is, well, it's not worth it for me to even say no, because if I say no, then I feel guilty about doing that, even if it's the right thing. And so this becomes, as you can see, kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of not being able to say no or doing it and feeling guilty. And really it culminates in this idea of I should do all the things for all the other people in my life before I do anything for myself. Professionally, this can be exacerbated by having to trailblaze. So really feeling like you have to pave the path, you have to pave the path for everybody else. And that can be emotionally and physically exhausting too, if you're like putting everybody on your back and trying to move them forward. So I mentioned the counter trigger for each one. And one of the things that we talk about often at Forthright People, in addition to personal brand, is being a vigilant leader. We also have lots of podcasts and worksheets and things on this topic as well. If you're not familiar, you want to do a deeper dive. But the high level of this is empowering other people to do whatever their role is, whether it's in work or life, really, really well, so that then you can rise above that, take care of yourself, and also rise in whatever you want to do to achieve those hopes and dreams that we talked about at the beginning. When people are able to embrace this idea and empower others around them, whether that is someone on your team or a coworker or your spouse or your children, you're able to create more time and space for yourself, which then leads to more energy. And it allows you and your team to be able to produce better and higher and be more high achieving. And also it allows people to have some more autonomy. I think sometimes what we fall into with this caregiver mentality is we feel like sometimes no one else can do it like we can, or we've always been doing it, so why would we change that? Or change is hard for people, and if I try to make them do things new and different, that's going to be uncomfortable, and I'm not sure that I want to do that. But really what we find is that when people start empowering those around them, it gives everybody else a strong sense of purpose, a reason to be proud, and also shows them that things are possible for them too. And then when you become the vigilant leader, it gives the people around you something to strive for. So if you think about direct reports on your team, right? If you're showing up as this leader that says, all right, everyone, here's your roles, you got it. I'm not going to micromanage, go do your thing. I'm here if you need me, but I trust in what you can do. That gives them something to then aspire to for themselves as they continue to rise in their career. So that is the caretaker. That is the first one there. And like I said, we'll go through each one and then I'll kind of talk about, again, just the high level themes at the end. So the second one is being empathetic, and this actually goes kind of hand in hand with the caretaker, but it really is that innate ability to feel other people's emotions. And in a good way, it can aid in collaboration and negotiation. But when you start showing more empathy to other people than yourself, this is where you can start to get in trouble. And the ways this shows up again in this situation is difficulty holding other people accountable, excusing away actions. This shows up a lot on teams when a leader leans into being too empathetic. So things like, oh, she's late all the time, but she just got that new puppy and I'm sure it's hard to take care of it. So therefore I'm going to give her a little bit more leniency. And again, I don't want to have conflict about it. So I'm just going to go ahead and hope that it passes, right? Or, someone who's notoriously late with deadlines. It's like, oh, but they're such a creative thinker. And, I really don't want to squash their energy. They're so good for the team. And yet then that falls on your plate as the leader to have to finish deadlines or compensate for people who are late and all of those different things. And as I said before, it can be compounded by the caregiver side of us, which is that dislike of conflict. So you can see how this can really end up eroding the team. And what we see, and the unfortunate thing that happens, is it erodes culture. And so it can happen at the team level, it can happen at the organization level. But when people start to see others being given certain accommodations and leniency, and not that everybody shouldn't have their own set of things, that's not what we're saying, but when that starts to happen, and it starts to happen as a pattern with certain individuals, it really erodes the credibility of you as the leader. And then the culture of the team suffers because people look at it and they're like, well, okay, I don't have that new puppy, but I have these things in my life. Or, I'm a creative thinker too, but I get my work done. And so why does that person always have that allowance? And so you can see how that shows up in a way that's really not helpful. So the counter trigger here is really all around adjusting your mindset. That is the first step. That's the thing that needs to happen immediately. This is not personal in those situations. This is business. And so there are certain goals and objectives that have to happen in order for a business to be successful. And so when you start to think through that mindset, it becomes much more objective and you can take the emotion out of it. So you can look at situations and say, look, I don't care what the reason is for that person always being late. It's not okay on this team to always be late, because if somebody's always late, then we're always behind in what we're doing. Or if this person's always missing deadlines, then that person is slowing down the other members of the team and they can't do their work effectively. And then those business goals aren't going to be met, and the objectives of what our team is supposed to do on the whole aren't going to happen. And when you can think about it that way, I think it helps with both being overly empathetic and the caregiver piece of not wanting to have too much conflict, because it allows you to take a step back from the person and their feelings and all of that, just to say, listen, this is a business situation. This is the expectation of this team. We all have things going on. And it's not that I don't empathize with what you have in your life, but the expectations of being a part of this team and your role on this team is that you deliver X, Y, and Z. You really need to be forthright, and that's not just because that's our name, direct and clear in stating what you expect, and then the subsequent actions coming out of those conversations, so that you're really turning the tables on the conversation, that the shift has happened, and now this is what's expected moving forward. And the really important piece on this is to not let it slide backward. So if that starts to happen, then again, you're eroding the culture. And honestly, you can do more harm than good, because then your credibility is really at risk as the leader. When you've made these statements and then you're not upholding them, then that's a bad place to slide back into. But again, it starts with your mindset. It starts with putting the business hat on and saying, it's not that I'm not a caring, empathetic person. It's that this is what we need to achieve as a team in a professional setting. And therefore, I'm going to set those ground rules for everyone. So that's empathetic. Fairness advocate. I will say that this is a big one that I have suffered with over the years. So this is me talking to myself in a lot of ways as well. This is the idea that we over-index in the expectation for fairness and the belief that we will all be rewarded for our hard work. And I think this is something that is, like I said, inherent to me and us as women just in total, right? We have this idea of what is fair in our head. And we also have this idea of, if we do what we're supposed to be doing, then a fair outcome should happen as a result of that. And the reality of the situation is that that does not happen all the time. It just doesn't. It's, other people have different rules of fairness in their head. It's that, life is life and people are people and we're not perfect and it isn't black and white. And so there are all these shades of gray in the way in which we're human. There's all kinds of reasons for why fair doesn't always happen in the way we have it defined. But when we don't address this within ourselves, there are some repercussions that happen, especially from a professional standpoint, in what we talk about as playing the game. And similar to some of the things that Anne set up in the beginning, this is one that's controversial. And it's one a lot of times where people will give us kind of the side eye, like, playing the game, that doesn't seem like something that I want to get into. It seems manipulative. It doesn't seem like the way we should interact. But what we will tell you right now is, if you don't find a way to play the game as far as whatever the ground rules are in your career and the office you work in, the company you're at, whatever it looks like, then you're going to limit your ability to rise. And this is really because, unfortunately, the work we do doesn't speak for itself. We have to advocate on behalf of ourselves. And a big part of that is being able to play the game. Again, we're not suggesting this in a manipulative way, but it's things like learning how to promote yourself, which we'll talk about more in the humble one, but that's a big one here. Learning how to have give and take in the work environment. So getting to know people and understanding what their currency is and knowing what they're looking for so that you can help them achieve their goals at the same time you're working to achieve things you want to achieve. It's really the nuances of interacting with people. And yes, you should still work hard and all of that, but you have to be able to interact in that way so that you can understand what are people's triggers, how do they operate, what are they looking for in order to progress you and your team and those around you all at once. That self-promotion piece is really, really, really critical here. When I say that I suffered from this especially as a younger professional, I would be really stubborn, also one of my characteristics, about the idea that, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go what I perceived as like sucking up, right? I'm not going to build a relationship with that person. I should be able to work hard and do this work. And then when I do the work, I should get whatever I want, the promotion, the raise, the bonus, the whatever it was I was looking for. And the honest truth was, a lot of times, not only did that not happen, but the people that stopped it from happening were the ones that I was refusing to interact with. So this is a really, really critical one. And it's not that, in a perfect world, we don't want things to be fair. It's just having the acknowledgement that that's just not always the situation. And so learning to work within the situations we're in. And honestly, also learnings from many years in business is that men don't have the same expectation, and they have less trouble seeing business as a game with winners and losers. It's one of their strengths. It's one of the things they're really good at. And I think when we objectively can take a step back and look at it, you can see the way in which they interact a lot of times is different. And there are things we can learn in the way that they do that to help build our own skills in this area. So what can you do in this one? This one is admittedly a little bit trickier. So one of the things we recommend is hire a business coach to help you address this blind spot. It can be really good to get someone that is not, well, you, but also isn't a member of your team or someone that you work with day to day. We often get the question when we bring up this counter trigger of like, do I really have to go hire a coach, or couldn't I just get a mentor within my company? And mentors are great and they can be super helpful, but especially if they're within your work environment, they're going to be looking out for themselves first. And that's not a manipulative thing. It's just that they're perspective is always going to be more attuned to what they're trying to achieve. And so they can't kind of give you the honest perspective. The other thing about hiring a coach that's really, really important is that you're paying that person to be there. And so you naturally hold yourself more accountable. And what they provide to you is a very objective view of what's going on and listening to the way you're talking about situations and things, and then advising you on what to go and do about it. There's someone who's very much in your corner and helping you achieve the things that you're trying to, but they're also there to, well, hold you accountable, like I said before, but also kind of help you build the tools and the experiences and some of that muscle memory that Anne mentioned in order to overcome this. One of the really specific things you can start doing immediately, though, is note when this characteristic is starting to be triggered in the moment. What are the patterns? Note it as it's happening, and then go afterward and reflect. And if you start to note all the times and places this is happening, you can start to identify patterns and then start to build some counter behaviors that will help you lean into more of what we recommend here. And honestly, it's all about getting in the game. So I'll just stop with that there. Obviously, Anne and I do coach. That's not a huge plug for us, but we are here for further conversation if you need it on this one. And the last one is being humble and the tendency to be over humble. This is, Anne and I talk about, we're in the Midwest here locally where we live. There's this Midwest nice, which is, everybody's like, oh, I just want to be friendly. And again, like my work will speak for itself and I'm not going to overly promote. One of the ways that people try to counter this one that isn't great is they show up aggressive instead, which is really unnatural. So in order to use or cultivate the right way to be humble, first we want to see how it shows up. So behavior that's not translating. Sometimes what we see, and we talk about this with some of our female clients, especially ones that are in heavily male dominated environments, is they try to take on an assertiveness that's not natural to them. And unfortunately, then that is perceived as some not nice words of ways of speaking about women. We said we were going to be forthright. So I'm not going to say them here, but we can all imagine what those are. But really, the reason that's perceived that way is because it's not your natural characteristic or way of being. And so it's an attempt to overcompensate for being humble and going too far the other direction. Another way that it shows up is in more of an egomaniac attitude. This is when you start exercising or working against the humbleness on a consistent basis. It starts to show up as someone who's really self-serving, self-centered, not in it for the greater good. And it also shows up as not being willing to admit when you're wrong or having an overall fear of looking bad. And so then that kind of clouds anything you do and any of the ways in which you show up, trying to counteract your humbleness. And so, as we said at the beginning, you have to look for ways to manage, identify, and then build new mindsets and tools moving forward. So the counter trigger here is to, again, focus on a mindset shift, which is all around the fact that ego in the good way is a key motivator for success. So not in the egomaniac way that I talked about before, but really embracing your ego as a positive thing that can help you build confidence. And then focusing on being the best leader you can be, acknowledging that you have the tendency to be humble. And so if you are humble, you have to find natural and good ways for you to show up confidently, whatever that looks like for yourself. And one of the ways that I think it works best to start with is to start to help others around you that have this humbleness about them on your team to identify it. And I think when you can step out of yourself and start doing that, it helps it be more objective because you see it easier in other people. And then it helps with some of that self-reflection of, okay, I'm helping that person with how they show up. Now I need to figure out how I'm going to show up. If I know naturally I'm more humble, I need to do my talk track of what I'm going to say. I need to practice it, maybe in front of the mirror. I need to find something that I like to wear that helps me feel confident. So when I go to have those conversations, I can get out of being humble. And it's really about presenting yourself and then your team and advocating in the proper way of the right level of confidence in what you're trying to achieve. So those are the 4 characteristics that we wanted to talk about. So again, I said at the end, I was going to summarize. So the first one is caretaker, the natural tendency to take care of others, sometimes at the sacrifice of ourselves and putting their needs first. Empathetic, so overly taking on other people's emotions and giving concessions and allowances as a result of being empathetic and wanting to be caring. Fairness advocate, so believing everything always needs to be fair and that our work should speak for itself. And then the idea of being overly humble, so not wanting to self-promote, not wanting to show up overly confident, and really making sure that with all four of these, we think about those counter triggers that we talked about in order to pause when the behavior is happening and then take a step back to reflect, and then starting to use those counter triggers to build new behaviors that help us to show up, like Anne said at the beginning, the way we want to, so that the appearance we're giving is the image we want other people to take away. And then I did mention the podcast a couple of times throughout here, but when we think about additional tools and things, this is a really good place for you to start with your personal brand or the vigilant leadership that I mentioned before. We have lots of episodes on personal brand. We have an extended one on this topic specifically that has more examples and kind of goes into some more depth of those characteristics. And then also on the vigilant leadership side, that's another topic that Ann and I are really passionate about, and we mentioned it here. So you can find all of that and many more episodes on our Marketing Smarts podcast for further information and additional tool building. I think you're on mute, Lindsay.
I am on mute. I'm sorry. We have dogwoods are blooming here in Tennessee, and I am a runny nose, so trying to mute myself. Sorry. No, thank you so much for sharing this presentation on personal branding. A couple of notes that I had taken away was, really kind of taking a look at which leadership characteristic resonates most with us and trying to just do some self-reflection on that. And I think our, not to plug the business giveaways that we're about to talk about, but those are really great resources to extend this conversation further and allow you to really apply what's being discussed here. And so just to reiterate those, we have a personalized coaching session with April and Anne, which will be really great for talking about blind spots and starting that accountability conversation. And then again, just launched the Stand in Your Power Executive Mom Leadership Program, which is an 8-week facilitated course starting April 1st and going through May 27th. And that will also be really, really great for working moms to take advantage of this time before our kids are home from school. And there's a lot here. We talked a lot about leadership in terms of teams within an organization, but there's also pieces of this that we can pull and apply directly into life. And I personally, as a mom of 3, like to look at myself as the CEO of my family and our organization and the culture in which we're building. And we know that culture is a direct reflection of leadership. So if, that can be challenging in a business situation as you're rising into leadership, or you're working with other leaders around you. And I like to say that, like, what it takes to get you into leadership is not what it takes for you to be a good leader. They're different. And so there's like a piece of that too. But, just knowing that we have the ability to change our outcomes and to change what's around us, sometimes by taking a step back and looking inward and reflecting in, which takes it back to personal brand with what you're talking about. So thank you so much for sharing that today. And we do have Krista and Michelle on. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And we would love to extend Krista an offer for you to win the personalized coaching session with April and Anne. And Michelle, we would love for you to join in on the facilitated executive mom program starting on April 1st. So we can touch base offline about what we need to get you both set up for that. April and Anne maybe can directly message with Krista and we'll get that set up. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they'd like to add? Just tuning in, Krista, Michelle, Laura. it's okay if not, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to say anything if you.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you. That's this was a great session. I've been trying to almost force myself to think about these things as I look to grow my business. So this was just a really great, inspiring session and definitely helped on some self-reflection fronts. So always appreciate you guys and the insights you have to offer.
Yeah, my sentiment is the same. This was great, guys. Thank you.
Well, we're also going to send you guys our personal brand development tool. So that'll help you to continue this journey as well. And you guys know where to find us if you want to go through it more and have a more specific conversation about that as well.
Well, thank you to everyone for showing up today and working through technical obstacles and busy time constraints. I will drop that tomorrow is International Women's Day, so happy day to all of us. And I hope you can find ways to show up and plug in. We are hosting a digital networking meetup to continue this conversation and to also talk more about overcoming limiting beliefs. So really taking this framework and then now how do you apply that? As we know, we're sometimes our own worst enemy. So how do you take these and really put them into action? So I hope you can join us tomorrow. That's Friday at 12 noon Eastern Central Time. And thank you again. I hope you guys have a really great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.